Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dripping Hartnell podcast. I am joined today by the lovely Abi Louise.
Howdy.
Mr. Connor Chadwick.
Greetings.
And the Irish lad himself, Aidan O'Connor.
Hello there.
So we have just watched the Keys of Marinus, episode 4, The Snows of Terror. The Bridge of Inadequacy or something we also decided to call it.
Yes. Yeah, because they shot it with that angle where it looks like the bridge is longer than they pan across. And it's like
it's tiny.
This is the thing. It would have worked if they kept it as a tight shot, but as soon as the camera zoomed out,
two cameras,
two either end, yeah.
But they've just panned across, and you're like,
it looks like, you know, one of those bridges when in a play center that when you were a kid, and it looked like a massive
exactly
bridge.
that. Exactly.
Doctor Who does soft play.
So what did we think in general? It was an interesting episode, I think.
We were saying whilst watching it that it almost stands as it because Hartnell's not in it.
Yes,
it also stands as just an original story as well, just with the backdrop of they are time traveling somewhere at the end that leads into Who. It's not very sci-fi. All the other ones have had a sci-fi element to them. This one was just there's a bad man in a hut on a mountain who steals for money.
It's very Indiana Jones.
Very Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
I think
we said that, didn't we? Last Crusade.
Yeah. I think its strongest element, I would have said, was definitely its set design. That was on top form, because again, you rewatch it like the Ice Caves, you can see that it's just covered in a sort of cellophane by today's standards, but you know, if when you look at it, it does look like ice, and it does look very good. And yeah, okay, the rope bridge is a little bit shoddy, and there's the whole thing of.
I generally think that was the only downside set-wise, was that stupid rope bridge.
But yeah, and as Connor said, you know, if you shot it just right, it would have been.
Well, it's even the bit when Susan goes across on the logs,
and
then she pulls the rope,
and then she just pulls it up, doesn't? Yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is, he untied it and threw it to them, so they couldn't get it back to his side. She just tied it all up. And wasn't there a shot as well when she's coming across it? You can see the bridge is just back up again. You're like,
yes, weirdly for some reason.
It was very
also,
much
where did the rope come from to tie the logs together?
That was the other thing as well, isn't it? Yeah, they got the rope from the bridge to tie up the logs, so then they could get across those logs to pull up the bridge that they just cut apart to tie up the logs.
Yeah, it felt like definitely one of those stories where Hartnell gone on holiday, and they were like, right, we need to find something to do, and it was very quickly thrown together.
Ian does pull off the doctor stand-in, he's very good.
Yeah, like Ian definitely is like, what would you call it, when you really like, this is when people obviously say during the Hartnell era that like obviously Ian and Barbara became more of the protagonists in this sense, like because they do the stuff that obviously Hartnell couldn't really do, like more the action-y type stuff, and it worked in this case. It works out because when you have, I gotta say, for these episodes, like the episode before and this one and a bit of the next one, it's really cool to see like how like they with a big cast, you actually are able to move people around, keep some people off screen if need be, and it allows for more character development, and you get more about you get to see these people develop.
I mean, story wise, I do feel like scripting wise, I do think it's quite a strong one as well. To be
Definitely.
It's a nice short story.
fair.
Because I mean, ultimately, I do also think that Ian showed very bad character judgment, leaving Barbara alone with him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's like he goes. I'm going to go out and find this guy, or this guy. He's one of our friends. And then I'll leave Barbara with here. And then it literally just cuts to him going through the snow. It just cuts, and this guy has almost made his new wife. She's sat there, they're eating dinner together, and in a very kind of uncomfortable, like a bad marriage scene.
But having said that, one of the things that I think is, obviously Barbara does have a few screams in that scene, but it was one of those ones that showed she can hold her own very well.
Yes.
And I think it's great to see a female character on her own in a dangerous situation where she isn't just screaming. She actually does, get in a few good punches, and quite literally at some point, and actually does hold her own against him. And it does hold up very well in terms of sort of breaking the stereotype of helpless heroine, I suppose.
I do like how they got rid of that dude though. The sword through the door thing.
That was very good.
It was shot really well, actually.
It was one of those things where it was a bit of a twist in a way. Because you're like, oh, we're not going to see what happens. These swordsmen are banging down the doors, and then you'll just leave him with it. But no, then he just gets accidentally swiped.
He's like, ah!
But it is clever because it means that none of the main characters killed him. Still, it meant because the thing is obviously in those scenarios there was no way of getting out of that, but yet it still kept the characters what you might call pure of heart. Certainly, because obviously you have the companions, but you also have these new side characters, and if they did something, you kind of run the risk of making them unlikable when they're now killers. But in this sense, all the characters were able to remain pure, and not by purity, I mean not murdering and taking lives, they in a really clever way that it was accidental, but it was somebody else. It was the villains holding the sword, so it was still the villains.
And it was
but overall, I do feel like this is a good episode, especially as technically it's the first Doctor Light, really.
They did the Screaming Jungle.
The Screaming Jungle was, but it's sort of first Doctor Light story in terms of a serial.
Yeah, because even in the Screaming Jungle, they replay the last bit where Hartnell is in it.
True.
That's true. Yes,
and then it starts off with the new footage. So technically, he does cameo. In the sense of being reused footage, but with this, they just arrive and he's just nowhere.
I will say as well, the way those fair play to those soldiers in that episode, because I can imagine being under studio lights in that much armor must have just been
obscured vision as well.
Oh yeah, and having to stay still while everyone's poking around you and everything.
Do you remember we saw one and he looked like he was asleep?
Yeah, he had his sort of eyes closed for a little bit.
He kind of slowly closed his eyes and opened them again, and then they sort of almost melted, didn't they? They sort of just melt, and you're like, oh, okay. You're expecting them to do more, but which they do. They just have the actors stood there whilst they filmed the other scenes. Pretty much. And then they just fell asleep. And guarding the massive fish tank block of ice.
Yeah. All the conveniently placed pipes around.
I need to Google more about why the person chose, why whoever dropped off the key fragments there thought there.
Fair.
I'm going to put a bunch. It is so Last Crusade because it's literally at the very end of the room. There's a knight. But I mean, it's
when you think about it, actually, both that and the Screaming Jungle, and in fact, I think most of the places in the Keys of Marinus, to the best of my knowledge, they've never sort of followed up on where those worlds were, and all the different places. There's a lot that they could sort of again do with this place. It's very undertold story for a story that takes place across so many different locations. There's only really one, which is Marinus, that they've really sort of expanded on. It'd be interesting to know. It's like the Screaming Jungle kind of thing. Why was the jungle screaming? I know it was obviously it's hinted and implied and things like that. And obviously we had the conversation in episode 2 about, you know, the morpho, the brains and things like that. But yeah, it just feels like there's a lot of it that they just haven't expanded upon, that they could have done a lot more with.
And now we are going to head on to episode 5, which is called
Sentence of Death, I believe.
Sentence of Death. So we'll join you.
I swear Hartnell had better be in this one.
We will join you after we have watched that episode. See you in a minute. Hello and welcome back. We just watched episode 5, Sentence of Death. That was boring.
Well,
what are you talking about?
I will mediate here. I can understand it was less action-packed. However, it actually kind of proves a point that when you've got the Doctor there, you actually don't. You can clearly tell the Screaming Jungle and the previous one, the Snows of Terror. They needed that action to fill the lack of exposition that the Doctor gives. With you know, Sentence of Death, it is a courtroom drama. There's gonna be talking, but the fact that you've got Hartnell back in it, you can clearly tell
with his PowerPoint presentation.
With his PowerPoint presentations, and as we mentioned, you can tell he's been on holiday because he's much more energetic. But I think, I think it feels boring compared to the 2 episodes that you've just seen. But at the same time, it feels like you're back on good, solid Doctor Who territory.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Oh no!
I knew you were going to say that.
It's like
when he came in, it was just like the sun. The clouds parted and the sun came out.
Well, it's you, as you said, you're like Susan in that very scene. You just run up and hug him. It's like, he's back.
Grandfather. Go on, Aidan.
And it's very like.
We'd have a glitch. Try again, Aidan. And we'll go back to Aidan later.
I don't know if anyone else has got this, and you won't see this at home, but there's he's frozen on the most fantastic
he looks like
freeze
he's about
frame.
to sneeze.
Yeah.
I will say this: it was nice to have the Doctor being out, but basically having to work out a mystery. I quite like that fact. It was once again, it was one of those really simple scripts, but I say it was, for me, it was wordy. As an ADHD queen, it was a wordy one.
I loved every moment of my Hartnell. Hartnell, when he's got a mystery to solve, he is at his best, because I like that, even though, like, you know, and I get that with the way the show was pitched at the time. It's the earliest form of its version. It was very much having to literally paint the picture for children as to how the person had done it. So he literally, you know, acted it out. I was not expecting him to actually grab Barbara and throw her to the floor, but nonetheless, we move forward, and he had a lot more energy about him, but also the cameras they used, the lenses they used seemed to be they were just really, really nice.
Yeah, they had like that fade in the background going on with like the crowds and stuff.
I had this Jimmy. I had this the other day with her.
I don't know technical expression. I don't know what they are.
All right, you called it filters. I call it a color grade.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a good Instagram filter.
I don't know anything about recording.
And now you're like, what a great fade they have on that camera.
No, they're all fuzzy in the background.
Depth of field.
I just use the phrase fantastic cinematography because it sounds like you know what you're talking about.
Great faded background. I liked that. Like,
I have to say, I particularly liked the black and the whiteness of it.
I can't.
I will say, like, it's gone from a very like at the beginning, it's like a very sort of thing of like, oh, the Vord, who are the Vord and all this stuff, and then stuff about the keys, and now we're here. I'm just like, okay, how did we went from here to here somehow between 4 episodes?
Yeah, we started off with scary men in swimsuits to courtroom dramas.
Well, bear in mind the last episode was.
Hats.
I was going to say, like, we went from scary men in like leather onesies and weird hats to then weird man in snow hut, and now we're in like death sentences.
I was going to say now we're in something which looks, let's be honest, slightly oppressive.
Yes.
It's got that. If you watch this, there's an element to it of the set design and the man. It's very again. It reminds you of certain oppressive regimes, which might have been the intention, to be fair, because we were discussing
the death by pastry hat men.
Yes, because this was 19
years.
60.
Yeah.
This was 1964.
64. So it wasn't obviously that long after. The war.
Are we like just like the last time we talked about Keys of Marinus? Are we avoiding saying certain words?
No, because I put them up anyway. So
okay. So we're all fine to say that it looks like the Nazis.
Well, I was saying certain oppressive regimes because we also mentioned how communistical it looked. So I was sort of trying to encompass everything.
all of them.
All of the oppressive regimes.
A very fine selection of oppressive societies. But it's the usual. It's the way that everything's so refined. It's either in circles or squares, but it's all looking very fine line and everything like that. It's all very controlled, like the environment and the people.
It's very thought out well as well, because again, we can make those. We make those jokes and comments, but you've got to bear in mind that when this was on, again, this was at a time when those sorts of that sort of imagery and style was in people's minds, and it would remind them of you'd realize how serious this was, and it's quite a brave thing for them to put that in at the time it was made, because obviously it is something that would have been quite sort of harrowing to people, fresh. And I think the idea of having that in this sort of courtroom setting really sort of does, again, give it a lot more gravitas compared to, again, the previous 2 episodes being
it does make me laugh though. You can see where they've gone, Hartnell's back now, we're going to get rid of Ian this episode.
Yes.
He's had his moments.
We need
it's a nice way to kind of, I guess, for the audience to go, like, after the 2 episodes where you see Ian being sort of the fellow who's kind of like a bit of the heroic kind of leader, in that sense, that suddenly now he's a victim in this case, being charged with something he didn't do.
I also like the way that basically, to explain where the Doctor had been all this time, was that basically he skipped to that location immediately and made friends with them because he knew the name. Yeah, he's been there the whole time because he knew the name of the person who had been murdered because he'd been working with him. So he went there off by himself, going, "Oh, they'll show up anyway."
I'll wait here. They'll appear eventually.
Yeah. Well, he goes, "What if there's?" I think it's under this same assumption because he's like, "Well, if there's a key here, they'll show up."
Logic.
You were like, "I'll miss them."
I will say this though: out of all the episodes so far, for me, even though Hartnell's come back and that's a good thing, I don't feel like it wasn't up there with one of my favourites personally.
No, I can understand that. No, I can understand that. I think it is one of those ones. It is very targeted to a specific audience. If you like sort of courtroom drama kind of thing, I think you can tell it was. I tell you what, I think this was an episode you could tell was aimed more at the adult side of the family audience.
Yeah.
That's the thing. But I've just looked it up out of curiosity, because we obviously said, the Doctor found himself ahead of this place, and then there has never, so far as I can tell, nobody's ever done a story of the Doctor's time prior to everyone else arriving.
Coming soon from Overton Audios.
But
light bulb.
I just looked it up out of curiosity, and it says, he jumped ahead to this place, and then once the others turned up, it's like, so we never actually find out what he did when he was there.
Doctor Who Marinus coming soon to Overton Audios.
Right, and on to episode 6. Then we can finish this serial off. Yum yum.
Okay, so we have just watched episode 6 of the Keys of Marinus, which is titled The Keys of Marinus.
Yes.
Now, I don't know. I thought that was it feels a bit rushed. It was good, don't get me wrong, but you had the conclusion to the courtroom story, and then you had obviously the conclusion to the main part of the story, but they neither of them left enough time for the other to really satisfyingly finish.
Very obvious that they wanted this whole courtroom who did it to be a two-parter.
Yes.
But they wanted to also, I get the feeling that, I don't know this for sure, I wouldn't be surprised if an early draft of the episode actually had the conclusion of the keys just literally, because they obviously had the guy, forgotten his name already, the man who sent on the journey in the first place, that obviously gets knocked out.
Yes.
Nothing should have happened to him.
No, he sort of disappeared, didn't he? Really?
Well, no. At the end of part 1, they all broke. Those aliens, the Vord, they broke in and killed him, and then went, "Ha! Now we wait for them."
Oh, of course they did. We should bear in mind that we've been watching this over the course of several weeks, so it's been quite a while since we watched the first one.
Bear in mind that we not only record it, we not only record this podcast fortnightly, but we don't listen to Marinus every time. We listen to a story in between it. So this is about 6 weeks, give or take. They hit him on the back of the head, and that's what we now killed him. None of that should have happened. It should have been a race to get there, to put it all in. You know, like how Sarah Jane Adventures did Lost in Time, with trying to get back to the caretaker and the captain to put the pieces of the chrono scene in. It should have just literally been this. At the very last minute, they came in and plugged it all in and got it all working, or just had them with him, and he's just like, "Thank you, off you go."
Yeah,
but I don't know, because I was more. I know that obviously, as we were saying about part 5, that everyone I like the courtroom stuff. I like the courtroom stuff. I wouldn't have minded that going on a bit longer, but I can understand why. Also, from a perspective, probably the producers came in and went, "Yeah, can we have an action sequence, please, to end this? Because it's a lot's been happening."
Yeah. I mean, the question that sorry, Aidan.
Oh yeah, no, it's just I definitely feel like it could have done with maybe one more part, just like maybe just to get it to at least 7, because like with the courtroom stuff, I feel like they really wanted, I feel like that could have been a story on its own, like just Ian gets framed for a crime and the doctor is having to be his sort of defense and try and get him out of it. It kind of feels like they I was enjoying how the kind of speculation of what's going on, but then suddenly the wrap up happens and you're just like, okay, now we have to get back to the main story. But then there's literally about 11 minutes left of the main story, and you're just kind of like, I could have done with maybe another full part of them going back, maybe getting captured by the Vord and having to break out and stop it before the machine initiates or whatever,
It definitely feels like the courtroom stuff should have been one and the final should have been another. But it's interesting that you've just said you'd rather have another part, because the question I was going to ask you was, if you had to get rid of the Screaming Jungle or the Snows of Terror to leave room for the final one to be separated into two? Which one would you get rid of?
I've got my immediate thought, but I don't know if it's well thought out. My immediate thought would have been Screaming Jungle, because with the Snows of Terror, there were a couple of things where we were like, this is a bit weird. But with the Screaming Jungle, there wasn't much leaning on it. Whereas this, you had a villain.
Yes.
You actually had a villain that was a person that you can sort of, when I say understand, I mean, like, he's assumed human as well. And there are always guys like that out there. You can kind of it's a very simple story, but I think it had an element of relatability to it.
I think Snows of Terror had the better set design.
Yeah.
No, sorry. I think Screaming Jungle had the better set design. Snows of Terror had the better overall sort of plot. As you said, you had this main villain. With the Screaming Jungle, it looked very good, but plot-wise, they sort of just plodded along to the, finding the key. It was sort of not a huge amount happened in it. Despite the fact that, to be fair, we've just reviewed the Snows of Terror, and we were all saying what was going on in that episode. Upon reflection, compared to the Screaming Jungle, it actually sort of has stages of plot.
Yeah, it's a build up of, like, what would you call it? It, like, because after the second one, which is in more of a like an add-on to the story, this one is like, oh yeah, there's a nice gap where you get to see more of Ian doing like heroic stuff. You get to see, Barbara being proactive. So it's like more the companions in this sense. And then you get back to the main story. Then with the Doctor, you pick up with him. So it's
I think because the Screaming Jungle and the Snows of Terror, as we said, are more action based than story based. I think if anything, what they probably could have done, or perhaps should have done, depending on how you want to view it, I think they should have condensed Screaming Jungle and Snows of Terror into one episode and had the courtroom finale and the final return to Marinus as two separate episodes. Because I think you had Screaming Jungle and Snows of Terror individually, you had enough action to sort of keep the stories going, but there were bits that you could tell they were trying to stretch it out. And I think if you condense those two stories down into one, you could have still had a really good tale of each one, but you would have been able to actually it still would have felt contained enough to have the story.
See, I still think if they had done that extra part with the return to Marinus, they could have had it be where, imagine if they had given over the actual key and the Vord had used the machine, and you get everyone except maybe one and Susan are taken over initially, but are more resistant to doing things outside of their own characteristics, like when they are ordered to maybe kill Ian or something like that, they just can't bring themselves to do it, and that shows about the will of the person as well. Maybe they could have done something like that, but they just didn't have the time, so to do a quick, I gave him a fake key at the end.
But it's also, that would have been a good callback to Velvet Web, where they're in a world that is completely decrepit, but that's not how they are under some sort of force that makes them see it as something else that it's not supposed to be. So you could have sort of had a kind of callback to that, and if anything, actually, it could have been an interesting callback to the brains of Morpho, or whatever they're called. You could have had them sort of semi-return alongside the Vord in this kind of, they've used the key and they've unlocked this, and now this has happened and it's taken people over, as you said.
I'm thinking there, I've just thought of this now. All right, this is a very how to put it, out of left field like comparison, but all right, so you guys are familiar with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers series, right?
I know of it. Don't think I've ever really watched it, but I'm aware of it. Yes.
Right, and you have no problem with spoilers, before I
no.
go.
Well, spoiler warning for anyone else listening to the podcast. Right. You're about to get spoiler warnings for
Aidan, what is it with
Power
you
Rangers.
spoiling people?
Right, so in the third season of that show, they end up splitting up this thing called a Zeo crystal, and basically it sort of gets separated into, like in this episode, different time zones and places. Inside, and I'm thinking the way that they do it in that show is they intercut between the different people in their adventure. So you could have, so I'm thinking like while they have one person searching for one part of the crystal, they have another person in say like the Wild West searching for their part. I'm thinking in this they could have done the Screaming Jungle Pit with say two or three of the characters, and then had the Snows of Terror episode with maybe another one or two, and that way then both parties can have their adventure. Like it cuts between them.
I get the feeling, yeah, I agree with you. I get the feeling that they would have not necessarily had them intercutting so much. They would have done it as two separate stories where you follow one team and then the other team would be the next part. They didn't really discover the whole idea of intercutting between locations working for a little bit, did they, really?
Yeah.
But it's interesting given the fact that the previous new series episode we watched was
Good Man Goes to War.
Yes, that's not the one I'm thinking of. Then the one before that, the Doctor's Daughter, where obviously they did have that cut between the Doctor and Donna and Martha. You know, you can have that sort of dynamic of the two stories. And again, I think, as you said, I don't think it's something that they would necessarily had explored in the classic era, but it certainly could have.
It's something that could have been done now.
Yeah, definitely.
And the stories are simple enough to follow.
Yeah, because later on they do start to go into that area, but that's later on down the line, like when you get to say maybe
there are some elements where they do that.
Yeah.
I think you can tell as well that these last two stories had a sort of. I'm not saying they were rushed, but you could tell again where they tried to condense it down. There's a couple of moments I think when Barbara and the two go to see the woman who's, spoiler alert, the murderer. And then another bit when they escape and then suddenly they're outside the TARDIS. You can tell there's a really quick jump cut and you sort of look like, okay, you could have done a fade out, fade in, but instead they've sort of walked off one set and onto another because they clearly had only limited amount of time.
It was quite funny the way they went, come on, let's go. And then they hadn't even made it out the door and it just cut to the other door.
And she's literally there with the door open as they walk in.
Yeah.
But it's good. It does feel a bit rushed in places.
Yeah, I get the feeling that they ran out of time in places.
I would say that it's sort of like this is no offense to Terry Nation and his writing. It's just like I feel like he does go big with a lot of his scripts.
Yes.
Like he wants to do a lot of interesting things and try and explore a lot. But I'd say he just realized he might have realized this is not going to fit the budget.
To be honest, it's probably not even Terry Nation. It's probably the production team looking at it going, this. Because that's what's happened with I believe it was the Chase. The Chase was actually meant to be a James Bond style episode.
Huge epic, wasn't it?
Well, but it was originally 6 parts. And then it was going to be a James Bond style spy thriller with Daleks. And then they said, we need this extended. We want this to make it a big epic. And so we had to make up stuff, which is why halfway through it goes to a different writer. Because Terry Nation just said, I'm not doing this anymore.
I think we can all agree at Keys of Marinus. It's another example of that. It's a perfect example of how Terry could write things that weren't Dalek related and do them well. I think it's just a shame that what he's written was clearly again meant to be this big epic, and it's just not as any criticism. I think it's more just limitations of the production at the time. It's a wonderful epic written by Terry that's not been realized to its full potential on screen.
Agreed.
I would say that's because again I think it's everyone sort of thinks Terry Nation and you immediately think Daleks because of course you do, but it does prove that he could write a lot of other good things, and when you consider the variety in this as well of not just aliens but locations, and things like that, you can sort of see that it's kind of like it's almost a bit of a shame that he got so tied down to Dalek stories, even though they were all wonderful. You really look at it and think like this story really does show how much more potential he could have had to have written non-Dalek stuff given the chance.
Yeah.
But you do get the feeling that I don't know. I could, this is me making assumptions. It wouldn't surprise me if there are tons of Terry Nation non-Dalek scripts that never got made because they went, where are the Daleks, Terry? We know that's what you do.
It's like being typecast. He just got typecast as the guy who always does the Daleks well, and then it's unfortunate for him then because he's like, I want to do something different, but then you're just
yeah.
But I've just thought, does that mean actually that because we mentioned this in episode 2 about the brains and the jars, the morphos, which were obviously meant to be or implied or hinted to be the brains that are in
Dr. Mysterio and Wedding of River Song.
I'm guessing that makes them a Terry Nation alien, which is why I'm guessing perhaps they didn't directly link them because, like the Daleks, they would have had to have paid his estate for them. So you probably find that's what it was. They were.
But when you look at the design of them,
it's clearly them. The only way, I think we said this before, the only way they could have made it more obvious is if they'd had the Daleks in the new, if they'd had the brains in the new series, have their eyes come out on stalks. If they'd done that, it would have been a clear reference. So you kind of get the feeling that they've tried. That it's kind of like you reckon, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You recognize these, you know what they really are. But we're not going to say it because then we've got to pay Terry's estate.
It's like somebody just says it to Moffat in an interview, and he just starts like doing a smirky smile, but he's not telling anyone anything.
Yeah.
Well, this is my kind of love-hate relationship I have with Moffat because he does things that references the Hartnell era and then destroys Hartnell.
Yes, let's not quite go. That's long-winded territory.
I cannot wait for the episode where we watch Twice Upon a Time.
Oh God.
Oh jeez. Oh no.
We'll just all go and make a cup of tea while you're just right. Okay, he's started his rant where we've got about 10 minutes now.
It's like what's the episode with the Orange Express? Start the clock.
Yes. Yeah. But yes, has anyone got any final things to add about the Keys of Marinus overall? Personally, I do like it. It's again one of those stories. I think now I've come to the end of it. It's one of those stories I don't watch often, but when I do watch it, I do enjoy it, and I kind of think, why isn't this a story I watch more often? Because it's a good length at 6 parts, but it doesn't feel that long because you're sort of split up into so many different stories. It's enough to keep you engaged. By the time you got to the end of one part, you're on to the next story and you're sort of want to see where it's going to go. And by the time you've done that, you're sort of at the end of the story.
That's true. Yeah. I still very much enjoyed it though.
Of course you do. It
would be very weird if you didn't.
Despite its flaws in the editing department. No, it's not in the same way that I like the Sea Devils episode that came out with 13, although the editing really suffered for that one.
But I think how would I say this? I haven't watched a lot of Hartnell like in a while, but it's been nice to kind of get a nice refresher on how his era is, like, seeing what's like, the way things were edited, the way the production was set up, because it's I know it's kind of reiterating a lot of things, but it's like it's very early days, so it's nice to see the beginnings.
It's interesting to see.
It's like I say this to people now who probably watched Twice Upon a Time and gone, oh my God, I go, guys, it's not like that. This is what you're seeing here is a nice time capsule of the actual, of the story. And
a good thing to note as well is that Keys of Marinus that we just watched is only the 5th ever story.
Yeah.
It's right. It's in the top. It's literally in the top 5 for the earliest made.
And it's a very strong. I think it's a safe to say it's a good. Unless you really want to start at the beginning, which there's no reason why you can't, or you want to start with the Daleks or Cybermen or something like this. If you want to start with something that isn't related to something obvious like Daleks or Cybermen, I would say Keys of Marinus is a good jumping on point for the first Doctor, because you've got a bit of everything in there. that you can
multiple locations and different times.
Yes,
And
you've
you
got
see
a good.
and you see how the early dynamic was between obviously himself and Ian in terms of like how they bounced off each other as the kind of the brains and the somewhat brawn of the.
Yes, I think it's very good. It's a very good starting point. But yes, anyone anymore?
No.
So next time we are watching. I should know this, and I don't.
Oh dear.
I thought I had it written down, but I do not.
Dramatic effect.
Dramatic effects. No, we're going to be watching something from the new series. I know that much because that's the way we're doing it.
Yeah.
But yes, it'll be something new series, and hopefully we may have a new cast member joining us if we're lucky.
Oh yes,
indeed.
So we
Stay
shall
tuned to
stay.
find out who.
It's Father's Day next.
Father's Day. Thank you,
Father's
Abby.
Day.
Yes.
Yes.
I knew
that's
it
gonna
was
make me
mentioned
cry.
earlier, and I was like, "Who mentioned?" Somebody mentioned it earlier, and I can't remember what it was.
That episode is going to make me cry.
Yes.
Oh.
I generally don't think I've seen it since it's aired. So.
Oh.
Anyway. The end.
Bye bye, people. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Farewell.